So welcome to another episode of Anomalies. This is a program about the borderlands of reality, about things seen out of the corner of your eye, about what might be hidden in the shadows. I'm Dan Hall, one of your hosts, and my broadcast partner Dave Jinks is here today. Dave, how are you doing?
Hi, Dan. I'm doing well.
Good. So we're pushing the envelope a little bit today. We've done a number of these podcasts, but we've never done a podcast before a live audience. And we're fortunate enough to be at the Olympia Center today, courtesy of several folks that we'll acknowledge at the end of the program. And we're going to talk about the unusual stuff that we talk about, but we're going to have a live audience, and we're going to bring them in as part of the discussion. Sounds like a pretty good deal, right?
Let's prove that we have a live audience here.
All right.
Yay! Sounds big too.
Yeah, they don't sound dead. They definitely sound live. Well, the topic today of our podcast is something we talked about before, but we're going to take a little bit different perspective on the alien agenda. So what we're going to talk about today is the possibility that there are extraterrestrials visiting Earth, what proof there might be of that, and if there are, we're going to talk about maybe some of the implications of that, like who are they, what are they doing here. And the difficulty with a podcast is that you could talk about this subject, and we have talked about this subject for hours, but we have a certain time limit that we have to work within. So I thought a good place for us to start here might be with some proof that we could be being visited by extraterrestrials. And I think maybe the Drake equation, if we're both familiar with, might have something to do with that. Why don't you talk a little bit about the Drake equation?
Well, the Drake equation is kind of a boring, dry way to begin the discussion. 1961, Dr. Frank Drake came up with this elaborate equation here. As you can see, it's got, 7 different variables. All very confusing looking, but very scientific. So it was okay for scientists to talk about the Drake equation as opposed to things flying around in the sky and things occupying and piloting the things flying around in the sky. So they looked at this equation, which has a whole bunch of, if you care to, you can look at what specifically it has as inputs into the equation. Again, pretty boring stuff when you discuss it, and we're not going to talk about all the variables, but it takes into account different things such as, the rate of formation of stars, the fraction of stars with planets, et cetera, et cetera. And so Dr. Drake came up with, actually his current estimate based on his equation, what was that he suspected there are 10,000 civilizations in the Milky Way alone that could potentially have life. Now, that doesn't mean that life is here, of course, or has any chance to make it here, at least according to Dr. Drake and his colleagues, but just thinking about the idea that, yeah, it's possible there are others out there, was exciting enough for the scientific community, and probably too exciting, actually, because a lot of scientists poo-poo this equation. And for good reason, because you can see all of those variables, there's so many, and they're widely variable. It depends on your opinion about a lot of things. But the one thing that scientists basically agreed upon is that the solution to this equation is greater than 0. So in other words, yes, there's probably life out there. Of course, Dan and I today are going to talk about life that is most likely here already, which is a giant leap from Drake to now, but that's a lot more interesting. So we're going to talk about that. Now, Carl Sagan, who we probably all remember, he in his early years was very optimistic about certain things like this. He actually, in his book with his Russian co-author, Intelligent Life in the Universe, he said, with the numbers we've discussed, it seems possible that the Earth has been visited by galactic civilizations many times, possibly every 10,000 years. Now, that was quite a statement by a mainstream scientist. Every 10,000 years, that's not that long ago. But again, it's in the past. It's safely away from today, where lots of people are saying, you know, look around, they're here. Is it possible they're here right now, Dan?
Well, you know, I was thinking about the Drake equation, and I think that's nice from a mathematical standpoint if you want to prove the possibility of existence of extraterrestrials. But, you know, when I look up at the night sky at night, and when you can see it here in Washington, there's just this Milky Way that you're looking at. So it seems a little arrogant from my standpoint that humans would think that we're the only intelligent form of life in the universe, and that we are kind of isolated on this rock in space. So I don't know that I need a mathematical equation to prove that, but I understand where Dr. Drake's coming from.
They think there was life on Mars at one time. They found pieces of bones up there.
Well, there's lots of evidence that suggests that, as well as other solar system bodies too. Yeah. Well, Dan and I are here to argue that aliens do exist and they're visiting Earth as we speak. How do we know that they're here? Well, we have a lot of pictures. Pictures worth 1,000 years, 1,000 words. And we do have hundreds of images, of course, that have been accumulated over the past, 100 years probably. A lot of them have been analyzed by optical physicists, computer engineers, scientists of all different stripes. But we want to start with an extraordinary incident that others have termed the Battle of Los Angeles. Has anyone heard of the Battle of Los Angeles out here?
1941.
Yeah.
I lived there.
Not to be confused with some movies
Well,
by that title.
Yeah. This, we're talking about a very interesting incident in L.A. in 1942, actually, that was covered by the Los Angeles Times and all regional newspapers. Some sort of object appeared over the skies of L.A. or that vicinity, and for a period of, many, many hours, the entire city was blacked out, went into blackout. Anti-aircraft guns struck this thing, apparently. 1,400 kilogram shells were launched at the intruder. No apparent damage incurred by it. And again, I mentioned optical physicist Bruce Maccabee is someone who's a real expert in terms of looking at UFO imagery. He looked at this thing, and you can see there definitely seems to be a saucer-shaped object in the middle here. Well, apparently that whole incident went down. The thing disappeared or flew away or whatever. Nothing was ever recovered, but for a good several hours, the U.S. military was in panic mode in this Battle of L.A. incident. So I thought that'd be a good place to start. Unfortunately, there's no conclusion to make other than it sure looks like something there. You can see the anti-aircraft shells bursting in the air around it. Now you can come to the conclusion, well, maybe there was nothing there. It was just war jitters is the phrase you hear. Well, if our military is that jittery to spend hours shooting at nothing, I'm a little bit worried.
Yeah, I think we ought to be worried.
And
I think we ought to be
probably
worried.
should be.
Yeah, no, to me, this is an interesting part of this discussion. Probably after this incident in Los Angeles and in the middle, probably about 1945, 1947, the Air Force got enough reports of UFOs, so they started keeping track of these UFOs. And one of the more famous ways in which they kept track was this Project Blue Book. Now, I think we were talking earlier before the broadcast here, there's maybe some conflicting numbers here, but I got off the internet, of course it's on the internet, it's got to be right, of course, that there were some 12,618 cases reported to Project Blue Book. And most of those cases were found to be some kind of natural explanation. Somebody was seeing the planet Venus, or, I mean, there's some standard things that people say. But the intriguing thing to me, that about 22% of those, which I think mathematically as a percentage rounds off to almost 3,000 cases, were not identified as being any kind of natural explanation. So in an offhand way, I think the Air Force was saying in Project Blue Book that there are things in our skies that we can't necessarily explain away as being some type of natural phenomena. And I know that we've got some pictures from some of those Project Blue Book photos here, so maybe that would be kind of a lead into talking about some of these photos.
Yes, and Blue Book, when the testimony of people who worked for Blue Book is almost, well, I'm referring to J. Allen Hynek, who went in as a skeptic. He was the chief astronomer for that project. He came out saying it was a total, whitewash. It was intended to appear to be studying something seriously, but there was always the foregone conclusion that there was nothing of any interest that would come out of that study. What I have up here is Project Blue Book. Actually, there was a special report, number 14, that came out of it that's lesser known. That was done by Battelle Memorial Institute. Had 240 charts and tables. It studied 3,200 UFO sightings. And it was much more intriguing than the public conclusion I think Dan was alluding to. That was kind of the overall project public conclusion. But this report is really where you need to look if you're interested in seeing what Blue Book really discovered. This special report concluded there were 33%. What did you say, 20?
Well, yeah, I had a little different percentage, but close.
For
It was
the overall
22.
study. This one, 33%, 38% of those reports were made by military personnel. So what we conclude from Special Report 14 is that the more reliable the witness, the more detailed, the higher quality the data, the more likely it is that the UFO remains unidentified. And that was a huge, very important conclusion that kind of escaped under the radar, so to speak. And that is that the better information you get in a sighting, the more likely it is that it's something that's unexplained. So speaking of unexplained, let's start looking at the images, because that's the fun part of this.
That's about
That's what you saw.
What they look like.
That's what you've seen?
Way up there.
Right.
Well, that's-
And I go, two of them just went zip.
That's a flying saucer.
Right. When I first saw
sure.
that picture, I thought we were talking about Colfax, Washington,
Well,
not Wisconsin.
close.
Yeah.
Well, not even close, actually. But this disc was seen by a police officer, Mark Coltrane, in Wisconsin. And he was in his squad car. The radio started crackling, which is another very common occurrence in the vicinity of these objects. And he looked up and saw this disc moving toward him. He got out and luckily had a Polaroid. This is back in the Polaroid days. And this is another view of the disc, just showing that it, it was there and it started flying away. This is a view, this is from Mexico, a view out a car window, actually. You can see the part of the car in there on the left. So how do we know they're here? Dan and I are jumping to this big conclusion, they're here. Well, again, the pictures are the thing that really strike us, but intellectually, you have to look to the insiders who should know about these things, and they tell us they do know. I like to defer to people like the Commander-in-Chief of the Royal Air Force in Britain. When he says something, I listen. We should probably listen when somebody that high up. He says more than 10,000 sightings have been reported. Observed speeds as great as 9,000 miles per hour. And he says, I'm convinced that these objects do exist and that they are not manufactured by any nation on Earth. Air Chief Dowding sees no alternative to accepting the theory that they come from some extraterrestrial source. He said this in the Sunday Dispatch, 1954. It's been a while. We have all sorts of quotes from people who should know. This is General Nathan Twining. UFOs, something real and not visionary or fictitious. A secret air intelligence report. The origin of UFOs is not ascertainable.
Now, if you dig a little deeper into Nathan Twining, you'll find out that he's connected with one of the more famous crash retrieval incidences as far as UFOs are concerned, and that's what allegedly happened at Roswell. Because the crash at Roswell, which some people claim actually involved several alien bodies that were taken from the crash, they were taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. At least that's what there's some documentation to show. So some of these stories have different levels to them in terms
So
of.
Nathan Twining was clearly an insider. He had information that certainly pertains to the reality of UFO phenomenon. Here's an image from Peoria, New Jersey. We have an officer of the Secret Service saying flying saucers exist. Their source is extraterrestrial. And this is an interesting part. And the future, relatively quite soon, should permit confirmation of this statement. Well, he said this in 1965. So you can make of that what you will. Something is going on in the skies. French captain, he makes a good point. If all the airline pilots and Air Force pilots who've seen UFOs and sometimes chased them have been victims of hallucination, then an awful lot of pilots should be taken off and forbidden to fly. And that's something that sometimes gets missed in this conversation, too. That a skeptical observer will say, well, it's all hallucination, it's all misperceptions of the planet Venus, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of these reports come from pilots, people who should know what they're looking at.
Yeah, that Delta, excuse me, Delta pilot just got back from Japan. He flies over there every 4 days. He saw something like that. He
Yeah, there are a
sees
lot
them
of
all
reports.
the time. It doesn't bother him.
Well,
Hey, E.T., come get me.
That's probably true. Their pilots, though, are not real willing to get back, land, and file a report that says, I just saw a UFO. And in fact, there are regulations prohibiting that, or at least were in effect, where you could be fined, I think it was up to $10,000 for reporting a UFO.
Well, and the other thing I think about that is you talk to pilots. Not everybody has the same belief system about UFOs. So some people who experience strange, anomalous things, the stuff we talk about, they're really hesitant to be upfront about that because they don't want to be cast as some kind of person that wears a tinfoil hat. I guess it's okay for you and I to wear that tinfoil hat, but if you're flying an airplane, that's probably not a good idea.
Probably not. But a lot of them do see things such as this. I guess you'd call it a disc, I'm not sure. A couple different views of this in Turkey. We have something from Rhode Island here. This looks like a rather large craft.
Looks like Bigfoot standing up there.
Yeah, Bigfoot right underneath there going.
If they go that fast, wouldn't they just be a blur?
Well, sometimes they are, but other times, the reports are all across the board. Sometimes they just sit there. Sometimes they go 10 miles per hour.
Which is interesting in and of itself because no flying craft just sits there unless it's got a propeller on the top of it. It might be a helicopter. So some of these craft do some things that defy physics. So there is evidence that world governments are in fact concerned about UFOs. This is France's Minister of Defense. He says, I must say that if the public could see for themselves the massive reports coming in,
they would see that it's all pretty disturbing. Now, that's kind of government speak there. What's pretty disturbing? Just the fact that we've got so many reports, or the details of the reports, or what we found out about, but it's still a pretty strong statement. Florida, this would suggest that the military is indeed concerned, despite the public proclamations that there's nothing to look at here. Please move along. I don't know what kind of helicopter that is. Somebody out here might know, but it appears to be in the vicinity of this disk.
That looks like a Black Hawk.
Yeah, I'm not good at identifying aircraft, but it could be. Here we have a general. As a general, my opinion is the same as the Air Ministry. But in my personal capacity, I have for some time held the view that UFOs are extraterrestrial craft. And then you can get into the astronauts. There's no higher pinnacle of scientific achievement than that represented by NASA astronauts. I think we all would agree on that. Brian O'Leary, former NASA astronaut and Princeton physics professor, he says point blank, civilizations have been visiting us for a long time, a very long time.
Dave, one thing I might talk about here is that we're a little pressed for time here, particularly to get some audience participation. So maybe we could skip to the part of the presentation where we talk about who. I think you could say that we've established some kind of a case for there being visitations here by people who have craft that don't necessarily match up with the kind of the craft we have on this planet. So maybe we could get to the idea of who might these people be? Who are these individuals?
Let's move on. Let's look at this though.
Yeah, the question?
Yeah, do you have anything on the Phoenix Lights?
No, but that's certainly, we don't have anything in the presentation, but that's certainly part of this record, And what I know about the Phoenix Lights is that was a huge craft that went through.
The lights were spread
Right.
across quite a bit of the sky, whether it was separate things or all part of some one thing, I don't know.
I think with a lot of these UFO reports, we get just the tip of the iceberg. There's more to be found out, and some people were very interested in dismissing what was going on as this Phoenix Lights as a squadron of planes or even a flight of birds. I heard that explanation. Some of that's just not accurate. So I think there are a lot of these cases. We're just touching the kind of the tip of the iceberg with some of this stuff.
Well, I saw a show the other day that the governor of Phoenix was on and told how he had tried to suppress it, but he admitted
Right.
that he had actually seen them himself.
Yeah, that was Fife Symington. Yeah,
And he
interesting.
came out, that was the guy who came out in the press conference
Uh-huh.
after it with, he brought along
Fake
a
alien.
cohort wearing an alien costume, to,
Yeah, he thought because he was the governor, he should try to diffuse the
he thought he should lie, which is a little bit disconcerting, but to go the extra mile to rent an alien costume
Yeah.
and then you're right, later he said, oh, by the way, that was all a lie and I saw them myself.
Yeah.
Is that what you want out of your government representative? Probably not.
I'd like a little bit more truth, I think, from my
Well,
government.
I like this though. Look at this thing. It's just
Yeah,
really
interesting.
odd. It
Down.
doesn't fit the profile of a typical saucer, and you can see this guy's going.
That's 2006.
I remember reading something about an object in Colorado, kind of near where NORAD is, and then, but it was like, it zipped around from spot to spot so quickly, there's no way that it was in a military.
Well, you might be referring to the Nellis Air Force Base, which is Area 51. And I do have video of that. I don't know if we're going to get to the video because we're having audio problems, unfortunately. But you're right, yeah. When something like that shows up on radar, does things that no known craft can do, it's a little bit disconcerting, and you would hope that your government officials would address that in a straightforward manner. Again, we have Gordon Cooper. I believe that they're extraterrestrial vehicles. This is a really interesting
Yeah, that's
one.
an interesting one.
Very colorful. A view of the same thing through the trees.
That's like E.T.
Yeah.
Eugene Cernan. I've said publicly I thought they were someone else. This is an Apollo 17 commander. You don't expect him to have flights of fancy or be making things up. Let's just look at this and we'll get to what Dan suggested. We kind of move ahead. This is a witness and photographer, Eric Thompson, a 69-year-old Australian on the way. He was going to take pictures of an old mine with his son's Kodak S50. This thing apparently emerged from the lake. He thought, it might not be safe for me to be under this thing, so he started to take off and went down the hill, and this craft went over his head, still dripping water on him as it flew away, and apparently there was a companion with it. I don't know if it came out of the bigger one. They certainly were operating together. This is an extraordinary picture. It's been looked at. There's no evidence of a hoax. I don't know how you would hoax something like this. I'm likely just take it at face value. It's an object that's there doing something. Who knows what? Really odd looking thing. He said this is when he caught it retracting its landing legs. It's very weird looking. You mentioned the Phoenix Lights. This was
reminds me of that picture.
This was part of a flap, Hudson, New York, Hudson Bay incidents that continued for years, and they were large crafts. Again, for years, multiple witnesses watching these things go over. Police officers, police departments. It was analyzed within police departments, and whoever else was involved, but we never figured out what the heck these things were doing. This went on literally for years, though. People say, well, how come a lot of people don't see these things at the same time? Well, they do. It's just, what do you do once you see the thing? You and your neighbor see them, you go, well, that was weird. I sure hope someone does something about it, and then you go on with the rest of your day. But
That's exactly right. That's what you do.
what else can we do?
Something hovered for hours right over my house. Who's
Yeah.
in charge?
Yeah, what are you going to
Who's
do
in
about it?
charge?
I did call the airport, that's all.
And it happens all over the world. The U.S., certainly, Canada. We looked at one from Turkey, etc. This one's a really nice close picture. That's the classic silver disc there. This was 1981, long before anyone had a personal computer they could sit around and make fake UFO pictures. That's why most of these are from at least 10 years ago. I kind of went back to before it was real easy to Photoshop things. This is an object possibly coming out of a lake. It was captured by a Costa Rican government mapping plane. Was analyzed by Dr. Jacques Vallée, who is credited for starting the internet among many other things. And he, unlike Al Gore,
I
whoever
was going to
said
say it wasn't Al Gore.
he can actually make claim to that, a legitimate claim to that.
I really like Vallée's books.
Hmm?
I really like Jacques Vallée's books.
Oh,
Yes,
Jacques Vallée.
he's very
Interesting author.
scientific. This was a vintage aircraft show in the UK. Multiple witnesses saw this object buzz the airplanes, as you can see here, right underneath. Let's do that again, because it's right underneath the planes, and this is it, just to show that it wasn't a bag or something floating underneath that happened. It actually had shape and took off. Another triangle wave occurred in Belgium in 1989, 1990. 2,600 sightings. The Belgian Air Defense was involved. They scrambled F-16s to try to figure out what the heck these things were. They achieved radar lock-on, but they couldn't catch the things. Giant triangles. Colonel de Brouwer, the Belgian Air Defense, he filed an extensive report, lots of details about radar, tracking, et cetera, et cetera. The BAF ruled out all mundane causes. They appealed to other air forces to help determine what was going on. They didn't get much of a response from anyone. This is one of those Belgian triangles, which is possibly my most favorite UFO picture ever, because you can note around the corners it appears to be distortion of light or possibly matter, which suggests, as a lot of insiders say, that these things are capable of distorting matter, time possibly, but they certainly can look strange even in pictures like this.
So let's kind of jump ahead now and talk about, I think we've established that there are some kind of strange visitations going on Earth, and these people are visiting in craft that don't really fit the kind of craft that we have here in the United States. So I think the more interesting question that maybe we should jump to as far as our time constraints was, who's piloting these craft?
Exactly.
Where are these craft coming from? And we've got some speculation about that. Some of this is not speculation because it comes from actual reports of people who have contacts with some of the occupants of these UFOs. So should we dive into what kind of alien presence, if there, or what
Well,
would
let's
explain?
briefly ask the question, though, because I've alluded to it. Why aren't we officially investigating these
Okay.
things? I mean, what is the problem when you
Okay.
get 2,600 people saying, "What is that?" and you
I think
get
they are.
4,000.
The government is doing lots of investigations. It's suppressed.
Oh, it's suppressed. Okay, well, that might be the key there.
Julie, Neil, the aircraft that, especially the vintage aircraft, were they affected by this object in any way? Were their instruments distorted?
If you look at the reports from the pilots, yes, that's very common. Some of those UFO pictures with that weird, roundish thing where the guy's looking up at it, their engines died. The police officer had radio crackling. So yeah, that's a very common report by pilots, the ones who do report it, of course. Most of them don't report it, but yes, there's some sort of electromagnetic interference.
Well, and there's even a more dramatic example of that in the 1970s at Malmstrom, I believe it is, Air Force Base, just outside of Great Falls, Montana. They saw some UFOs were reported on radar, visual contacts, and that Malmstrom Air Force Base was the ICBM facility. It had intercontinental ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads on them. And when these UFOs were overhead, the capability to launch those missiles went away. Somehow the UFOs affected it so that they turned off the launch capabilities. So to me, that's a really dramatic
Well, and
kind
they
of
even
interaction.
turned off one at a time, which was not supposed to be possible. Or actually, they were separate, basically on separate networks, and they either turned off one at a time. They all turned off,
Right.
basically.
And it
And
happened to Russia as
but
well,
it shouldn't
the
have
center.
been possible the way the computers were set up for someone to affect them all, but they just went blink, 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 off. I mean, it was a major panic in that facility because who's doing this? So the Russians somehow got into our network. Have they cracked our codes?
And
Or
if I
who?
think UFOs are a problem, they really become a problem for the military. Because what the Malmstrom Air Force Base situation and some others shows that the military can't do anything about this craft.
Well-
They can't necessarily, they try to shoot them down, that doesn't necessarily work.
Right.
These craft can go faster than any of the conventional craft that we have. So really it becomes a national security problem. That's one reason I think the military's hesitant to maybe share as much as they could about UFOs.
Right, and let's briefly talk about the Brookings Report.
Right, Brookings Institute.
Many of you have probably heard of the Brookings Institution Report. That was a report, technically proposed studies on the implications of peaceful space activities for human affairs. A typical government title there, I guess, but what they were really looking at, it was prepared for NASA, was what happens if we encounter life somewhere. 200 interviews with highly esteemed scientists. Margaret Mead, the famous anthropologist, was involved. Representatives of the UN, MIT, Stanford, GE, I'm not sure what GE, well, they're a defense contractor, the RAND Corporation,
They're a defense contractor.
National Science Foundation. Very, very serious scientific people involved in this. What this report told NASA was that if plant life or some subhuman intelligence were found on Mars or Venus, for example, there's no good reason to suppose these discoveries would result in substantial changes in perspectives or philosophies in large parts of the American public. However, if superintelligence is discovered, the results become quite unpredictable. And they go on to say anthropological files contain many examples of societies sure of their place in the universe which have disintegrated when they had to associate with previously unfamiliar societies. In other words, intelligent beings piloting craft that we can't catch.
So let that sink in for a second, because what that says to me is that if some kind of superior intelligence that wasn't from Earth was found to exist, that would cause humanity to question everything. Religion would go out the window, national security would become an issue. So I think we can maybe get some kind of hint as to why some of the information that the military and the government may know about UFOs hasn't made itself available to the general public, at least through government and the military, because they're scared to death about what we would do with that information.
And Brookings even suggested how might that information be withheld from a public, or under what circumstances?
That's very believable.
They
would withhold it.
Right. Would be in their best interest to do that.
Brookings said that would be electrifying, especially to religious, Christian sects, Eastern religions, etc. For them, the discovery of other life would be electrifying. Now, that may be true. I've talked to a lot of people who are religious, tied to religious organizations, who say, that wouldn't really affect me. God created everything and me, so why not aliens? So the next part of the Brookings report is probably even more applicable to the real problem. That is that scientists, Brookings said, might be the ones most devastated by the discovery of extraterrestrial life. I said, it's been speculated that all groups, scientists and engineers might be the most devastated by the discovery of relatively superior creatures, since these professions are most clearly associated with the mastery of nature. So in other words, you're no longer top dog on the scientific ladder.
I think that Stephen Hawking has the right idea. So don't advertise out there that we're here, because we contact a superior intelligence. Now, we see what happened on Earth when some superior intelligence encounters someone not so advanced.
Yeah. Well, it's a legitimate concern. So finally we get to the alien agenda.
I think it could be a positive concern.
Well,
we need some more intelligent people leading us.
Well, that's part of this
possible
discussion about why they're here, because there's a variety of different agendas that they could have.
So what we've tried to do in this short time is go from, is there possibly these things flying around in the sky, to, yes, we think there are, and if we accept that premise, then we have to assume that someone is operating these things, piloting them or whatever. Who are the occupants, Dan? That's the next question.
Yeah, and that's the one that's probably the most difficult one to answer.
Well, we've left ourselves 10 minutes to
it's easy to take
question.
pictures of strange things in the sky, but to figure out who's in them. Well, one answer that I don't, as I looked at our presentation here beforehand, that I think we kind of ignored, is that some people think that really what we're seeing in the sky is us, that we're seeing a military aircraft that's on some kind of black budget, so it's not popularly known in the public that those things exist. So a flying saucer might be just an advanced military craft. There are some people who actually believe that some of those UFOs could be time travelers from the future, going back and coming back to visit us. So those are, sometimes when we talk about aliens, we're always focused on who might be, what kind of extraterrestrials might be visiting. But, one answer is it could be us in some form or another.
Yeah, it could be. Now, there are people who are insiders. I picked Major Robert Dean. He claims to have seen a cosmic top secret report. 12-inch thick thing, dozens of photographs, 8 inches worth of appendices. This was a serious undertaking. He had to check it in and out of the vault from the German colonel, who was the head of security. They let him look at this thing. And what this thing said, this NATO report, Dean, by the way, was at NATO's command center. He's a highly decorated veteran of multiple wars. What did this report say? It said, the human race has been the subject of detailed survey by several different extraterrestrial civilizations. They've been doing it for hundreds of years, probably longer, and that there's a process or program of some sort designed to condition us. Selective appearances of UFOs as part of that conditioning process. And, of course, contact with extraterrestrial beings has been made. I have a video here. Unfortunately, our system is not working, but I'll tell you that it was Army Sergeant Clifford Stone at the National Press Club. 57 different species have been cataloged according to his information that he witnessed at his time in these special projects. One of them is the Greys,
Right.
which
Whitley Strieber's book,
probably
Communion. If anybody's ever read that, he talks extensively about the Greys.
that's the Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Steven Spielberg. There's some variations, but generally that's what allegedly they look like. The Reptilians, who clearly are more reptile-looking with snake skin or alligator-type skin. Nordics. These, of course, are the beautiful blonde people. I don't know if that's just a cute kid or if that's supposed to be one of the Nordics over there. And then you've got the Insectoid, the praying mantis types. Not cute. So, again,
Why are they
that's a lot to take on board right there, isn't it?
It is.
Because first of all, why would they look like that? Why would they vary so much?
Well, one
A
of my
praying mantis, for God's sake?
But one of my thoughts about the term alien is that we have a habit as human beings as portraying things the way we think they ought to be.
Mm-hmm.
And there's usually some kind of human element to that. So why couldn't things that are alien truly be alien? I mean, they could be unrecognizable. These forms of life we can put into some kind of category that's familiar, but why do they even have to be anything that we would even conceive as being life if they're truly alien and from a different dimension, different world?
Well, that's where it gets really, really speculative. You know, are these beings that are reported, are they some sort of, what's the term, screen memory or some sort of projection? Is that really what we're seeing? Or are these things or intelligences capable of shape-shifting? Are they capable of basically manipulating our brains so that we see what they want us to see or what we want to see? And I guess you have to consider that a possibility, because if someone is here, you have to assume that maybe they're 100, 1,000, million, 10 million years ahead of us in terms of technology. And maybe they have learned how to manipulate space and time and reality in a way that we just have no hope of understanding. And that's kind of the really perplexing part of this whole thing, other than why are they here? And that's the next question we have. Why spend your time with us little humans on the low end of the cosmic food chain?
So let's let you speculate about that.
Let me.
Yeah.
But we study insects.
Well, that's exactly what I would say. I would say, I always have the analogy of Jane Goodall among the primates. How long did she do that for her whole career? 30,
Right.
40 years or something. You don't, if you're conducting an experiment, you don't insert yourself into the middle of the experiment and screw it all up. You observe, you take measurements, you sneak around the edges, and if you desire to get involved at some point, you do it slowly. You make appearances here and there. You go, hey, how's it going? I'm just passing through. And eventually, if you want to be assimilated, you get yourself in somehow. You work yourself into the dynamics of the group that's already there. So you could view this the same way. However, you can view it in a totally different way, and that's that we are in an alien zoo, and that we are potentially useful to someone else, and it may be something that's so above our heads that we have no clue why we're being used or how we're being used, but we are being used and abused, possibly.
Well, and where some of this discussion comes from as to what might be the agenda of these aliens comes from the alien abduction phenomena. Mm-hmm. And there's some pretty far out information out there about that. But one of the things that seems to be, there are several common themes, but one thing that seems to be a common theme is that there's kind of a disregard for how whatever they do to the humans affects the humans. So that's where the zoo analogy makes sense to me, because I think we as human beings assume that we have some kind of superiority over other animals, so we can stick them in a zoo, or we can drill a hole in their head and put some electrodes in there and see what's going on. So when people report this kind of treatment by aliens, it seems to be so demoting of their dignity. That sounds a lot like what we do to creatures on this planet that we don't seem to think are as smart as we are.
I think
How come Area 51, when one of those UFOs crashed and they took the bodies out and they don't know where they put them?
Well, I suppose if we recovered these beings somehow, certainly we would study them, but of course it would be done in total secrecy. I mean, if you think about it, that's the only way it would be done and should be done. There's this idea in the scientific community that if we had something like this, that it would be public knowledge, that we would gladly share it with the world. It would be on display somewhere. And I just, I don't buy that argument. What about you, Dan? I mean, what do you think?
Well, I just think there's so many different possibilities, and it's hard to know from an outsider's point of view what somebody's subjective intention is. So I think a lot of possibilities, but nothing super probable.
Yeah, I think, like this gentleman back here said, that it really, I mean, when I started looking at this, over 20 years ago, and wrote a book, which is back there, by the way. It's been 15 years since I wrote that book. But I was just dead set that this is wrong, we're being wronged, this is it's an egregious breach of trust, blah, blah, blah. And then over the years I realized if I was in the position of leadership, government, I don't think I would share this with anyone. I think I would probably try to cover up in every way possible. Yeah. And I would throw my principles out the window, because there's a higher principle here, which is that I don't know what the hell's going on.
That sounds like a higher principle.
Why am I going to tell people that I don't know what's going on and I can't control any of it? And we might be zoo animals. These things might be manipulating us. I mean, if you read Linda Moulton Howe's stuff, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with her earthfiles.com website, which I highly recommend, the more information we get, the more it's apparent that all of these entities, not all of them have benevolent intentions. And she's nodding. She said you read 100 books or so, and I think that's where you get to that point. You go in thinking idealistically about, we want to be part of the galactic community and our space brothers, and they're here to save us from us destroying ourselves with nuclear weapons, which may be the case.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I think that's the other side of the question, the other side of the subjective question. Because when you start looking at these alien abduction phenomena, you get people saying, well, the Space Brothers told me that we're ruining the planet. Mm-hmm. So we need to do something about that. So if you look at it from that standpoint, it's kind of I don't know if it's join the Galactic Brotherhood, but it's kind of a wake-up call that we need to quit screwing around and destroying our own planet, whether it be by nuclear power or polluting the planet. So,
Well, I think I heard you guys saying it's too late, right?
well, that
Yeah.
could be, that could be.
And I-
But at least to me,
could be.
that's proof that not all the messages are, or all
Well,
the intentions might not be
The message, but
malevolent.
what's the intention behind that? Because I can see Jane Goodall saying, "Stop that, you bad monkey! Don't destroy your, don't poop in your bed," or
Yeah.
something. Which is, that's not necessarily because we're concerned for the monkey. It's because you're messing up
Right.
the experiment, or you're destroying a planet.
I think that's why they did the little bit with the missile silos.
Turning off the missiles.
To let you know, we're
Right.
not going to tolerate
Right.
something like that. And they scared the daylights out of the
Yeah.
Russians the same way by switching theirs on.
But we're also not going to step in and stop your global warming or your Fukushima
Nuclear
Daiichi dumping millions of tons of radioactive water into the ocean, which is going to hit the West Coast here shortly.
I think it already has.
I think
Bad,
it's
bad news.
It'll be hitting us for a long time.
Yeah.
But they also don't step in and fix things. And you hear an appeal to the what's the thing from Star Trek, the
Prime directive.
Prime directive.
You don't interfere with other civilizations.
You don't interfere, but clearly they interfere in certain ways. And so the intentions, it may be because allegedly there are many different species who have different motivations.
There have been proof of someone is manipulating these UFOs, as you say. I'm a very practical person, and you've lost me in
I probably lost you right when we started talking.
Personally, I
Which,
think there's a lot of junk up there circulating in space.
Space junk.
uh-huh.
Yeah.
And why couldn't it just get out of and get into the gravitational pull that we have down here, and it's just some junk,
Right.
in our gravity.
Well, and I think that's the importance of that Project Blue Book, because Project Blue Book looked at the however many thousands of sightings and said a lot of them could be just that.
Right.
They're not necessarily.
all the same.
Yeah, UFO doesn't mean alien from another planet. It just means unidentified flying object. So that could be your space junk that you're talking about.
But not in 1940.
Well, probably
No,
not.
most space junk burns up upon re-entry, so if you have space junk coming in, it's just going to come in and crash. It's not going to hover silently, it's not going to take off upward, that sort of thing. But you're right, I mean, obviously there's a lot of bad data in
The astronauts come
data
back
pool.
into the gravity pool, and they don't burn up.
You know that.
Well, you have heat shields and everything, so.
They come down
yeah.
in a controlled way that
Heat
space junk
shoots,
would.
parachutes, so on. But yes, those are obviously legitimate concerns. We have to rule out all that stuff, and unfortunately, we can't do that just in an hour. But
Yeah.
if we had a whole weekend, I guarantee, as long as you could stand to stay in here, that you would walk out going, wow, there's something.
Never had any proof that there are creatures of some sort manipulating these UFOs.
Well,
Is there any?
it depends on what
you consider proof.
consider proof and evidence, and we would just refer you, we have a sources or a references page that's back there. It's, like I said, it's taken me over 20 years to come to this conclusion, because it's just, there's something wrong about this idea that there's other people piloting craft in our atmosphere that we can't do anything about, or doing experiments on us or whatever. That's just a thing that humans, I think, naturally have an aversion to. And unless you go through the multi-year process trying to weed out the garbage,
Why do we
it's
have-
reasonable to have that opinion, definitely.
What's
Why
that?
do we have to keep putting a picture on everything? Why can't it just be energy that is controlling these spacecraft?
Well, that's,
Intelligent energy.
That's plausible.
yeah, definitely. They could be probes.
Yeah.
I mean, we send probes out to other, if
they're
there's
not
life,
manned.
if there's life on Mars, and they see our probes land and whatever, that's an odd creature. Well, it's a robot.
I think we've proven that there has been life on Mars, whether there is now or not, is still.
Yeah, I agree on that. definitely.
Well, let's go ahead. This seems like a natural segue to open it up to the audience. So we've had a little bit of audience give and take here. Like Dave and I said, we could spend the next 3 years talking about UFOs. You'd miss whatever you got going on at noon.
Right.
So we'd like to take an opportunity now, and Fletcher has, although I think you might be able to, do you think they can be heard through this mic, or do you want to use your handheld mic?
Mike is picking them up, but not as well as this
Okay.
would. It's up to you.
So we'd like to give you an opportunity to ask questions. That assumes we have answers. I don't know that that's a good assumption.
Yeah.
You can make statements. I have a feeling, just inkling here, that there might be some people in this audience who have had UFO sightings or interactions. So if you'd like to ask a question, just signify that you raise your hand or something like that, and Fletcher will pass the mic to you. And please state your name, too, just your first name, it's fine. Go
My
ahead.
name is Francis,
Francis, hi Francis.
and we were up at that place, and all of a sudden I looked up and I was watching the stars, and all of a sudden I saw these two square objects moving real fast.
Were they moving in a straight line?
They were moving in a straight line, and I go,
That's
did
not
I see a
normal.
UFO?
Uh-huh, well, you could have.
It might have been.
Well, I want to, if you don't mind letting
No,
us.
I don't mind.
Yeah, what's your name?
My name's Clara.
Clara.
Yeah,
okay.
Clara had some things she talked to us before
Clara
the presentation.
is
You had
very
some
well
experiences.
read in these areas, but she's also, having read over 100 books, at least, I have a feeling, but she also has had an experience, apparently.
Tell us about that.
I've got a very large curiosity. I saw my first unknown sights back in the 50s, in the late 50s. And from where we lived, there was a mountain ridge, I don't know, just a couple of miles away.
And where was this at?
In Maryland.
In Maryland, okay.
And I always had a habit of looking at the sky before I got in bed at night. It was a bitter cold January, crystal clear night, and the stars are their cold, white light color. And here go these three large oval, kind of a golden looking things in a formation going down the length of the mountain ridge there. And of course, I have no idea how high they were. But I did, reading later on, find out there was a terrific flap going on up in New York State at a place called Winnock Reservoir. At the same time that I saw these, and we lived right almost on the border of Pennsylvania, which wasn't that far away. And I often wondered, was that connected? And then about 10 years later, my husband and I were in the little city that we lived in a residential neighborhood, and I saw this thing. The sun had set, but the sky was still very, very light, and it was coming right straight at us. And I saw a picture later of one in a book about UFOs that was identical to what we saw. It had the 3 windows on it, and it wasn't very high overhead, and it was just cruising. It wasn't fast.
And this was
And
what
the car
year?
stopped.
What year you said?
That was about
60s?
1968.
Okay.
And
your
the
car
stalled.
stalled, which is very common.
My husband's trying to start the car, and I opened my door and.
You're looking at the
stood up.
UFO.
I had to see this boy.
Yeah.
And it just went on by. It was lighted on the inside. And then sometime later, I found out that the son of a friend, he was about 8 years old, he and some children were playing in the next block on a vacant lot, and he said he saw something with that looked like 3 lights connected together. So I had some verification there. When an 8-year-old sees it as unusual, which probably is.
And the more witnesses you have to a UFO event, the more likely you're actually seeing something.
Yeah, and the strange thing that hovered over my house, the whole neighborhood saw it, and in fact, one neighbor brought up a pair of binoculars, and it just stayed stationary over the house, in the best way I could describe it. It looked like a Hershey's Kiss, you know,
Really?
little chocolate candy.
Uh-huh.
It was shaped like that, like a top.
Was there any sound coming from it?
No, absolutely
Nothing.
nothing and no movement. And when I looked at it, it just looked like a black dot, you know, with the naked eye. But with the binoculars, it was metallic.
So what did it do? I'm always interested to hear how these.
I don't know, I kept going out and looking and it was still there.
just stayed there?
Finally, it was dinner time and I was busy. And, like I say, who do you
Isn't it interesting
report
when
that to anyway?
when that's a fairly typical encounter, and you think, well, if I saw a UFO, I would get out my video camera and I'd take 1 million pictures of it and I'd call the police and I'd do all this, but you don't. That isn't what happens. You just go, oh, that's weird.
I never
And
said
then you-
anything about the trash that fell out of the sky either.
And you're like, well, someone's got to be monitoring that and will take care of it for us, right? I mean, because that's why we have air forces and that's why we have radar and et cetera. But it turns out most often that nothing happens,
Yeah,
and we
no,
just
that's true. At the same time this was going on, we were having a poltergeist in face.
oh well.
In your house?
Yeah.
Oh, boy, you were having a
Dan
lot
would
of
be
stuff going
interested.
on there.
Things disappeared and
Yeah.
reappeared, and a little kid kept calling for his mama, and there were bangs and thumps and all kinds
Well,
of
Dan
things.
might be interested to have
Like
an
that.
entire
My
show with
daughter.
you as the guest, the featured guest.
Featured guest, poltergeist activity in UFOs, that's,
Yeah, well, we messed up with that. I think we brought it on ourselves.
Okay.
I had, as a child once, I had a friend that had a Ouija board.
oh, yeah.
And we sat with that thing and it never did squat. But then my daughter was approaching, too old for toys, and I was looking in the Christmas catalog. Maybe I could get her a game or something that would be sort of a toy. And
Yeah.
I
You got a
opted
Ouija
for
board.
Ouija
Yeah,
board.
okay.
Turns out my daughter's sensitive.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
The planchette, they call it, the thing that moves around with myself and her, it moved by itself. You didn't have to touch it. And
well, that's
that's unusual.
interesting.
Yeah,
and-
that's fair.
and that the skeptical response to that would be that, well, you know, how could these?
Don't ever touch one of those things.
How?
That's the thing I learned is you have to know how to open a portal and how to close it.
It's a spirit communication
And
device.
then we were
It's not a
stuck
game.
in an open portal there.
Well, that is evidence that the UFO phenomenon, and this you
And you
hear,
can see these things.
is somehow connected to changes
It's
or
all
manipulations of,
mixed up together.
and
And during that summer, we saw a thing in the sky. We were out on our screened-in porch, and about 6 of us, and one of the kids said, "Oh, UFO," and we looked up, and here was this, I don't know, I could say it's probably a ball of plasma or energy or something. It looked as big as the moon. And if that's ball lightning, you know, they say they're little. This was basketball size.
Clara is an entire show
I think she
unto
is.
herself.
I think she is.
This way, it was going,
We
you know,
could-
kind of on an irregular path
Yeah.
Right.
across the sky. You never saw 6 people move so fast in your life.
I-
To get out of that
Certain
porch.
things motivate us, don't they? Fear is one of those things. We're running short of time. Is there anybody else who has a comment or a question that maybe we haven't heard from? Anybody?
I would like to say something.
Sure. Jackie, I know
I don't
Jackie.
think this is our home planet.
Ah,
I think that this is a jail from the galaxy. And we are all, that's why we're all
Interesting.
different people. Forget the theory of evolution and all that. And the reason the aliens are up there, they're monitoring us. They know we're a warmongering people, and we got as far as Mars and the moon, and they don't want us to get out in their other galaxies.
right? Have
Whether
you?
I really believe that or not, but I think it's a good story.
Well,
They said everybody
I'll-
was
Purgatory.
I'll tell you somebody who does kind of believe that. He's no longer with us, but Zachariah Stitchin, who I'm not sure
Yeah,
his
I read his
Sitchin.
his background, but he wrote a book called The Ninth Planet, Nibiru, he calls it. And his belief,
12th
or the 12th
planet,
planet?
isn't it? It's the Pluto was the ninth,
Oh, the
and
ninth,
it's
yeah,
not.
that's right, okay.
So 12th.
I've got my numbers screwed up, but his idea was that there's this planet that orbits, intersects Earth periodically, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of years, but that life on Earth came from that planet. So it is that kind of idea that you're talking about, a space seed, where we weren't the original inhabitants here. So, and maybe they come back every however often just to kind of check on what's going wrong or what's going right.
That's if we don't get too far out there.
Right, right.
Well, you can
There's
just,
at least 6 in that series.
yeah, Sitchin. You have to conclude whether you're on the skeptical side or the, for lack of a better term, believer side, that when you think about life in general, it's very bizarre that we're even here, that we, that humans exist. We're flying around on this giant rock at 60,000 miles per hour or whatever. So when you accept how strange that is as a premise, it's not that stranger to consider that there's other life and other realities. And I guess that's why we do the show, Dan, isn't it? Because we like to ponder those
Right, think about those
crazy
kind of things.
thoughts.
Well, let me just take this opportunity to thank some people. We're at a point in time where we should probably end today's podcast. But I'd like to thank Fletcher, our audio person, for,
Thank you.
you can go ahead and thank him. I'd like to thank Chris from the Olympia Center and Senior Center. You're the activities director, correct?
Thank you.
And a person who's absent, Sarah Rucker-Thiessen, who kind of got this all going for us. And we'd like to thank the audience for being here, too. That's really cool.
Yes, thank you, audience.
So a couple things. There are some books in the back. You're not welcome to take them, I guess.
That's
but you're
Dan's
welcome,
library.
welcome to look through them. And hopefully what this is all about is getting you to think. Because like Dave and I said, Dave and I have been fooling around with this topic for 20 years. He wrote a book on it. So it's not just
Well,
something
Dan's
that
written a book, too.
Yeah, but
Don't skip over
well,
that.
mine wasn't about UFOs. Mine was more about the poltergeist kind of thing. To give a thorough vetting of this topic in 45 minutes, you can't do that necessarily. So
No.
there's a resource list in the back that you're welcome to take, and that's got a bunch of books, some of which are back there on the table. And there's also some websites so that you can do some further self-education. But we'd really like to thank you for being here. Maybe we'll come back, do something else.
Thank you.
What, Chris?